So I got into high school, and at that point I was starting to think about what direction I wanted to take in my life. I was thinking, what do I want to be, really? And I looked around at the different types of people, and we had every kind of guy in our high school. We had bikers, we had athletes, we had surfers, and we had the people who were into their study and all that. And I started looking over at the athletes, and I don't know about your schools, but the school I went to, this was Corona Del Mar High School, CDMHS. We had different sections where the athletes would stand in one section and the surfers would stand in another. The athletes would stand in one section where their Letterman jacket, put one foot up on the planter, and their cheerleaders would stand around and drool, And if a freshman went through senior square in my school, they'd can him head first in the trash can. And then they had the surfer section, and this was this long planter, all the surfers sat. It's funny, to me, surfers all look the same. They got the blonde hair cut and the hang ten t-shirts and the sandals. They all just sit there going, Stoka Boca, man, So all the surfers sat in one part. And then there were these weird people. They hung around the vending machines, I don't know what they were. They said, hey, man, vending machines, Strange. And then there were those who liked to hang around in the library and study at lunchtime. I never could understand that at all. And so I decided I wanted to go out for sports. Now, as you can see, I never was a great physically built person, but I was always good at track and running and things like that. And so I went out for football for a split end because I figured, I don't have to sit around and get annihilated in the front line there. I can run out for passes and be a hero and all that. And so I went out for football, and I was doing pretty good, and it was hard because, you got to get out there and hit these bags. And our coach was really some sort of a nut or something. He wanted you to hit this big metal thing with these pads on it, and hit it until your ears started bleeding. He go, bleed, rah, So we did it, It was that big macho image, be an athlete. And I worked and got the butch haircut and went out and got all my football equipment, and I was called into the office about a week before season started. Told I couldn't go out because my grades were too low. That really bummed me out because I'd worked for months, in the training and after school and giving up my time. And I thought, oh man, forget that. And so we'd go to dances at night and drink a 6-pack of Colt 45 and that kind of thing. And then a friend of mine told me about smoking marijuana. Now I'd seen the movies, in school that they show you that were made in 1930. Where the guy smokes it and turns into a raving maniac and runs out and murders puppies and things like that. So, my friend told me, he said, man, smoking grass is really good. You're really going to like it. And I said, no, it's bad, And I had all these ideas in my mind, and he said, no, let's go ahead and do it. And so we sat down in this room, and it was really dark, and it was just like I thought it would be. And I was expecting the police to come bursting open with submachine guns, Elliot Ness, Nothing happened. We got loaded, and I kind of liked it. So I thought, that's kind of fun. I think I'll get loaded and drink a little on the side. And again, it wasn't a big thing to me. It was still just a social thing. And we were just running around at night and just doing what all good, wholesome, all-American high school kids do, And just going through the normal antics, and I could walk across the campus and everyone would come up to me and go, hey Greg, hi Greg, how you doing? I knew everybody, I was popular, but I didn't have any friends, I didn't have anybody that I really could sit down and open myself up to. I always joked a lot, and I'd make fun of people and walk up and put them down, and that was my big act in life. But I was really, empty inside, and I was trying to cover it over. And so I started getting into smoking grass a little bit more, and this was in the 60s, and it was when the so-called hippie movement started gaining popularity. Tune in, turn on, drop out, Timothy Leary and all his garbage that he gave out and that kind of a thing. And I started seeing him on the news and hearing about these rock concerts and people coming into this hippie thing where, you get natural with people and you love your brother and you love sisters and free love and loving at the park. And I thought, hey man, that is where it's at. They've got the answer. And so I was getting in trouble a lot at Corona Del Mar High School. I was called into the office just about every other day for something or another. So I decided to transfer to Newport Harbor High School because I'd heard that over at Harbor High you could get loaded in the front lawn and no one would even hassle you. So I transferred over, and it was mostly true. I started hanging around with a bunch of friends that were really into getting loaded, and I started growing my hair long and doing the whole thing and really becoming a hippie, I was so proud of myself. And it's a funny thing because someone that takes drugs they often think they're a little bit better than you, especially someone that does it more than just a social thing. And I walked around and thought, as Jimi Hendrix would have put it, I was experienced. I'd come into a new dimension. It was like everyone else was lame, but I was really into what was happening, and I was into a different realm of thinking, in a different realm of awareness, and I really had an answer. And I was really proud of myself. Then I started dropping LSD, taking acid. And I started doing it on a regular basis and really enjoying it, and thought I was coming into a whole new awareness of thought. And I have drawn cartoons my whole life. And I started doing my art and drawing these little cosmic creeps, on paper. And we started growing marijuana in our backyard and really getting into it. And I just thought this was so far out. And I'd run into some of my old friends, my old athlete, beer chugging buddies. They'd see me and I knew what they were thinking. They're thinking, oh, Greg's just become a pothead. But I knew that I was really turned on, and they were just lame and they didn't know, I had it together, I thought. And so one day we went down to Laguna Beach. We were going to buy a kilo of grass. And we went down and got it and put it in the trunk of our car, and we were driving back. It was a very rainy night. And driving near Laguna Beach along the cliffs, that, if you go off a cliff, you're in trouble. And we were driving along and it was raining, and suddenly our car started fishtailing. We started losing control, and we slid into the other lane, and we were going right into head-on traffic. And my friends were freaking out, and I was in the back seat. And I saw the headlines in the paper the next morning, drug freaks killed on the freeway. And I could see the old ladies going, it serves them right, And I thought, I don't want to go this way. And I remember crying out, God, if you get me out of this one, I'll serve you. I'll obey you. I'll do this and do that. And we're spinning out, and all of a sudden our car, we got back in the lane. I went, thanks a lot, God, God had got me out of another fix, but I wasn't going to serve Him. Reminds me of the story of the guy that was slipping down a house. He was losing control, and he couldn't get hold of himself, and he was going, God help me, God help, help, help! And he was almost at the edge of the roof, and all of a sudden his belt loop got caught on a nail. He said, it's okay, God, I got caught on a nail. That's where I was at. Whenever God would get me out of a jam, I would say, oh, it's all right, God, it worked out. Not realizing that He was the one that worked it out. And so it got to a point where I started to get loaded with my friends 4, 5, 6 times a day. I had about a DF average. I didn't care, though, People would say, your grades are low. I'd say, who cares? What good is an education? What good is this life? I look at these people that tell me about an education, and I saw that they had so little, and they were so empty inside. And I thought I was really getting a real education. I was learning about life the right way, I thought. And so, just getting into that and taking acid on the weekends, and that was my whole life. I walked in front of Chuck Smith's house probably about 500 or 600 times before I was a Christian. And it's funny because they told me this later. They used to look out the window and pray for us because on the corner, we used to deal drugs out of this guy's house and have big parties and get loaded and sit out in the front, and hey, wow, space out and nothing. And they used to drive by and look at us and pray for us all the time. And little did I know that, later on that those people were going to be a real major part of my life. Walked right back and forth in front of their house. Never knew, but they prayed for us. And, praise the Lord. It worked, sort of. God's still changing me. And so, things just began to progress. And one time we were walking across a parking lot, and we were holding a lot of drugs on us. And I saw a cop parked over in the shadows, and I knew he was going to bust us any minute. And I looked in, and I saw his face, and he was reputed around the Newport Beach area. We called him Baby Face. It's because he had a face like a 17-year-old, but he was about 30 or so, and he hated hippies. He hated them. And he would harass you to no end. And so we were walking along, and we started dropping the drugs through our pants legs and everything, trying to get rid of them. All of a sudden, he got scratched. The siren and the whole thing. He's only about 20 feet away. Pulls around, takes us out of the car. All right, you hippie freaks. Goes down, starts frisking us. He didn't find anything. And I remember saying, oh, God, if you get me out of this one, Lord, Well, He got me out of it, and I was happy and shined it on again. And so we went over, and we would get loaded with our friends and just kept doing it and doing it. And then one day, I think the thing that probably every person that takes drugs maybe fears happened to me. I took acid one night, and I had a bad trip. It hit me wrong. It went into my bloodstream. I started to panic. It made it rush, and I just started going wacko right there in the room. The room started spinning. I started seeing all these strange faces, and I kept hearing this voice yell out to me, "You're going to die. You're going to hell. You're going to hell." And I just freaked out, man. I started screaming. My friends had to physically hold me in the room because I'd just totally gone overboard. I just thought for sure I was dying. And then one of my friends came in and I remember crying out, "Oh, God help me. God help me." And it just got worse and worse, and everything just got more wiped out and more, I couldn't see anything, and everything was, it's just a horrible experience. Just so much of Satan. That's why so many people who are into drugs often go off into mystical type things, because there's no doubt about it. It opens you up. I did not believe in the spiritual realm, but as I took drugs, and I'm not attributing it to drugs, I'm just saying it opened me up, and I got more into Satan himself and saw that there really was an evil force. But fortunately, by God's grace, He was able to get hold of me before I went too far. And so I came down that day off it, and I said, "I'm never taking LSD again in my life. That's it." That scared me, man. I'll just smoke weed and forget the acid. And so I would take mescaline and cannabinol and reds and whites. But then my friends kept taking it, and I really wanted to get, turned on again to acid. So we had an English class, and we were supposed to go watch West Side Story and Romeo and Juliet for our class. And I loved Romeo and Juliet. That was one of my favorite movies because, again, I always had the thing, meeting the perfect girl and falling in love. And so I loved that movie, and I went, and my friend said, "Hey, let's take LSD. Oh, hey, that'll really be good." So we took acid and sat in the movie. And I was sitting there watching the movie, or I could have been watching the wall for that fact, just... And this girl was sitting in front of us, and she turned around for a minute and turned back, and I just looked at the girl. Here I was stoned, watching Romeo and Juliet, and I see this girl, and I start going, there she is. I've met her finally, And I knew that this was the one. And I looked at her, and she looked at me again, and I went, "Oh, wow. Oh, I got to meet her." And so it was weird because the next day, a friend of mine, I went over to his house, and he had the latest Beatles album. And the Beatles had just broken up. And it was funny because I followed the career of the Beatles maybe a little more aggressively than most people. The Beatles really had an impact on my life. They helped me get into drugs, and I followed their careers. And when I watched them break up, it had a strange impact on me because I was just coming off a psychedelic trip, and I sat there and thought, wow, the Beatles broke up, man. And I thought, something's happening. And I knew in my life a change was coming soon. And so I really wanted to meet this girl. So the next day, Monday at school, I was walking across the campus, and I saw her. And I went, all right. She was talking to a friend of mine. I'll just walk right up there and get in the conversation. Well, as usual, I got up and I started getting all flippy because I get around a girl I like. I couldn't maintain myself. So I walked up, and my friend was talking to her, and I was going, "Oh, God, there she is." And I looked down, and she had a black book with gold edges on it. And I went, "Oh, no. She's a Jesus freak." Now, if you want to be popular in school, you don't become a Jesus freak. Because I looked at her and thought, what a waste, man. Because I used to avoid Christians. I didn't like to talk to them. We'd be out on the beach, and we'd see Christians coming, and we'd literally go out and hide in the water to get away from them. Because Christians never went in the water because they didn't want to get their Bibles wet, So here is this beautiful young girl. And at that time, I was very disappointed because she had wasted her life on Jesus. And so I just looked at her and, wow, what a bummer. And so I started watching her, and I'd watch her go across the campus. And I didn't like the Christians because the Christians would walk across the campus Monday morning at 8 o'clock, first period, and sing. Not Friday, fifth period. Monday, first period. And anyone that could be happy at that time was a little wacko as far as I was concerned. And they would be singing about Jesus and carrying their Bibles, and I just couldn't identify with that. And so I saw this girl, and one day I was sitting out in the front lawn, and a friend said, "Hey, there's a guy on campus, man. He's selling orange sunshine." That's LSD. And he says, "Why don't you go get some?" I said, "All right, for the weekend." And so I went walking across the campus looking for this guy, and I started hearing this, Jesus, near, 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 near. And I looked over, and here's about 50 of these Christians sitting, love, love, love. Is that the way Christians dance, Then they all point up to this guy. What are they pointing at? So I just looked at him and I saw that girl. Her name was Chris. And I saw her there and I went, there she is, man. And then I saw this guy talking. He was sitting down and he had long hair and a beard. And I said, wow, he kind of looks like sort of a turned on guy. Maybe he has some good things to say. Maybe I'll listen to this guy. So I sat down close enough to hear what they were saying, but not too close so people would think I'd become one, because don't want to do that. And I sat down and listened, and I kept looking at Chris, going, oh man, I'd sure like to get to know her. Then I started listening to this guy, and he said something that just shook me up. I'd been witnessed to before. I had drawers full of Christian literature, little red Bibles, the chick tracts. Remember the one that says somebody goofed, where in the end the guy pulls his mask off and it's the devil? I read that while I was stoned and laughed. Just laughed. I thought it was hilarious. They didn't have any impact on me. And so, here I was listening to this guy talk, and for some reason what he was saying was having an impact on me. It never affected me before. I laughed at Christians. And he's talking, and he said, Jesus said, you're either for me or against me. I thought, what? He said, Jesus said, you're either walking with me or you're scattering against me in opposition to me. And I stopped and thought, well, does that mean that if I'm not like one of these Christians that I'm against God? And I thought, I'm not against God, man. God's got me out of a lot of jams. I believe in God. I've called upon Him and He's helped me out. But yet I'm not like one of these people. And I began to realize that either I was for Christ or against